Hi there. So, I recently had an experience after watching a movie that we've all probably had at some point in our lives. Here's what happened. I was at a showing for this new movie, Serenity, a couple of weeks ago, and while I was in the theater watching it, I was totally absorbed and on the edge of my seat, which is not something that happens to me too often. I really liked most of the movie, but after leaving the theater, when I went online to look at other people's reactions, I was surprised to see that film critics and most of the internet hated this movie. So it got me wondering, how do we deal with liking something that everyone else hates? How do we use other people's thoughts and experiences to develop our own opinions? I'm hoping that by talking about Serenity and some of the things I really liked and my reaction to its wider reception, I can better answer some of these questions. To give you a little background, I'll give you a brief plot summary. And yes, unfortunately, I'm going to have to spoil the ending to talk about it, because it is the target of so much of the hatred for this movie. The film features Matthew McConaughey as Baker Dill, a fisherman and war veteran who's been on Plymouth Island for so long he can't remember when he first arrived. He spends his days drinking, swimming naked for some reason, and fishing, trying to catch his white whale, a giant tuna he names Justice.
Me and the boys were saying you should give him a name.
I already gave him a name. His name's Justice.
As Baker goes about his business, a strange suited man with a briefcase repeatedly tries to talk to him, but Baker continuously ignores him. Baker's troubled past resurfaces when his ex-wife, Karen, played by Anne Hathaway, finds Baker on Plymouth. The two had a son together, Patrick, but after she and Baker split apart, Karen married an alcoholic billionaire who now abuses both her and Baker's son. Patrick spends his days in his room, coding on his computer and trying to tune out the domestic unrest that now surrounds him. Karen tells Baker that she's been looking for him. She set up a fishing vacation on Plymouth Island for her husband, Frank, and tells Baker that he'll be here in a couple days. She wants Baker to take him out fishing in the middle of the ocean, get him totally drunk, and push him overboard for the sharks. After much debate with the townspeople, his first mate, and himself, Baker reluctantly decides to help Karen for his son's sake. Now, this is where the movie kind of falls apart. The man who's been chasing Baker finally catches up to him and explains that his name is The Rules. He presents him with a fish finder to catch Justice and begs him not to kill Frank. He's forced to explain that Baker is a character inside of a video game created by Patrick. Baker's compulsion to catch the fish has always been part of one of the many games on Plymouth Island, but Baker's new compulsion is something else. Baker understandably falls into an existential crisis as the world around him tries repeatedly to prevent him from killing Frank. He's not sure what's real or not, but The Rules returns to tell him that if he realizes who their creator is, then that's the new game. So, Baker resolves to carry out justice. Baker rushes to the boat, takes a drunken Frank out into the ocean, and shoves him overboard. Simultaneously, Patrick in real life grabs a knife and kills his abusive dad, and as a consequence ends up in a juvenile detention center. At this point, it's revealed that Patrick's biological dad is really a deceased war veteran who looks just like Matthew McConaughey, and Mr. Baker is Patrick's teacher who sees in his coding ability a real potential for genius. That being said, video game Baker gets a call from Patrick and he tells his son that he did the right thing. Patrick tells his dad that he's changing the game so that he can come and visit him. Baker's world collapses around him and the final shot shows Patrick running to Baker on the Serenity. So at this point, you might be shaking your head, asking yourself, Nick, how could you possibly like this movie? It's utterly ridiculous. And yes, this movie is utterly ridiculous, but the first 2/3 of it had me on the edge of my seat.
Hey, Lois, you know how in Plymouth, they like to say, everybody knows everything? It wouldn't be funny if the truth was that nobody knows anything.
Oh, no. must paint you.
What this movie does so well is that it creates an incredibly tense atmosphere that you're trying to puzzle out. All the while, McConaughey continues to fish and swim naked. I love the electric ambiguity that surrounds Plymouth Island. Everyone Baker interacts with seems to know more than him, but we're never clued into why that is, or what Baker thinks about it. We're left with so many questions about Baker and the illusion of change that permeates his world, like the little moments that repeat themselves throughout his day. You can tell he's trapped, but just how is he trapped? I even wondered to myself whether Baker was somehow a younger version of the old man in Plymouth's bar, who he routinely buys drinks. He even sits in his seat later in the movie. What's so unique about this movie is perhaps the other films it draws upon to immerse viewers. Atmospherically, this movie has a lot in common with The Truman Show. However, it doesn't let the audience in on the joke being played against Baker until Baker himself realizes it. Structurally speaking, Serenity has a murder plot as dark and sinister as a film noir, with a close resemblance to the film Double Indemnity. However, all that being said, what grounds the film is the central relationship between Baker and Patrick. This is where Serenity evoked a reaction in me similar to Interstellar, and no, I'm not comparing these two just because in both Matthew McConaughey drives a pickup truck through a cornfield. For all of Interstellar's emphasis on space travel and the survival of mankind, at its core, it's a film about Matthew McConaughey trying to get back to his daughter, Murph. At the heart of Interstellar and Serenity is something overwhelmingly moving that I always love when a movie gets right. They're both fundamentally about a father and child trying to reconnect with each other, despite being separated through a medium. One as vast as space-time itself, the other a video game. Now, I can totally understand why people hate this movie. The twist that McConaughey as a video game character is pretty absurd and very poorly delivered. Stephen Knight, the writer and director, reveals the reality of the situation with very little delicacy and with even less respect for the audience's ability to figure out the story on their own. In terms of performance, Anne Hathaway is just okay, and McConaughey channels his inner seaman and turns his ruggedness up to 11, which I love, but I can understand how others might view it as erratic and a bizarre performance.
I'm the rules. I am the rules, huh? Yeah, it's done, son. Just like in Iraq, that was a game, huh? Shoot 'em up game? I was good at that game, huh? That's right. It was put to good use.
But what I'm trying to say is that Serenity is not a great movie by any means. Reading other people's reactions to it, I definitely get a sense of general dissatisfaction, but there's also something else. Fascination. I can't count how many videos I've seen floating around YouTube right now where people debunk or theorize or explain the ending of Serenity. Clearly, I'm not the only person who's had this movie floating around in their head. At the end of the day, Serenity is a puzzling movie. I'm still not totally sure if I can say what I think of the film as a whole, and it's now certainly beyond me to say whether or not it's good or bad. This is a case where talking to someone with a fresh perspective is always welcome, so here's my big takeaway from Serenity. Reviews and opinions will always be there to help inform and enrich your own experience with a movie, especially when you don't agree.
Now that is a great movie.
I'm the rules. I am the rules, huh? Yeah, it's done, son.